Jesus would often say, "Let not your hearts be troubled. Have faith in God and faith in me. Be not afraid."
I had this weight on me of these things that I did as a young man. You will be forgiven. You are my son. You are going to be free of this. There's nothing is too big for God, brothers. Well, it's really great to be here. It's great to be among so many Catholic men. All the fathers that brought their sons with them, can you stand up for me? Thank you, gentlemen. It's the greatest gift you can give to your son, for sure. So, Eustace, I got a little bone to pick with you, brother. How do you put me after Dolan? Are you kidding me? Now I have to do like a whole disclaimer, how I only went to the 7th grade, I'm from the streets, like, so you give me a pass. So when I was asked to come to Philadelphia, I immediately thought about what would I say for just the first minute or two, just to break the ice, just to try to get comfortable, because I know about the snowballs, I know about Santa Claus. I know you guys had a tough time in February, you know, like I know these things. Hey. And this will explain to you why I didn't do what I was gonna do. Okay? So I spoke in LA about 3 years ago. A priest called me, he's a friend of ours, and they were doing a men's conference, and he said, "Would you come and share your testimony?" He said, "Your brother Mark is also going to speak." And I said, it was his parish. I said, "Absolutely, Father, I'll be there." And so I started going through my closet, and I get my Patriots jersey, my Celtics jersey, my Red Sox jersey, my Bruins jersey, my New England Revolution jersey. I don't even know who they are, right? And I brought them all. I put them all on, and I put a coat over it, and I got up, and I said, "Hey, guys, it's really so great to be here. Man, it's really hot." And I took off my jacket, and there's the Patriots jersey. I took that off, and you get this scenario, right? It's one jersey after another, and they try to boo me out of the building. And I just thought I could potentially get hurt here, and so I did bring a couple of Philly guys with me in case we needed a translator as well. No, I mean for me, so you could understand me. They say we talk funny in Boston. You guys with the water ice and all that, you guys are amazing. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Lord, thank you. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for my redemption. Thank you for the gift of my life. Thank you for all the crosses that I had to bear to get to this place in my life and to be the man that you call me to be, although I fall short on many occasions. Thank you, Jesus. In the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So you might have saw me hawking books downstairs, so feel free. Special deal for Philly guys. We only charge you $5 extra. If it's okay with you, I'm going to read the dedication of the book, and then I'm going to share my testimony with you guys. And you'll have to bear with me. I've read this dedication hundreds of times and never quite been able to get through it all. This book is dedicated to the women, who have impacted my life and in fact saved my life. To our Blessed Mother Mary, for your continued intercession on my behalf, for the love and mercy you have always shown me. To Saint Mother Theresa, for your yes to our Lord and to the poor and forgotten, your kindness and mercy changed everything for me. To Mother Alvera of Comunità Cenacolo, for your sacrifice, your service, and your joy. You have been a reflection of God's love and mercy for me and for my family, as well as thousands of other families you have touched. To my mother, Alma, who suffered greatly as a result of my addiction. Thank you for never giving up on me and for your endless prayers. To my wife, Benerata, my partner, my best friend, your love and support have meant the world to me. Our Lord picked you to walk on this journey with me, and you have made me a better man. You are the love of my life. Thank you for everything you have done for me and for our family. And to my daughter, Kyra, thank you for being the amazing young woman of God that you are. You are in my prayers always. So I'm going to take this off here. I'm probably going to wander around a little bit. So as you heard, I'm from Boston. I'm one of 9 kids. And, so my family is kind of well known. And so there's sort of some misinformation out there about us and how we were raised and who we are and where we came from and all that other stuff. So I just want to clear a few things up. So they say we're a nice Catholic family from the tough streets of Dorchester, right? And I would say to you that I'm not sure that I would consider us such a great Catholic family, or at least at that point in our lives. So I was raised in more of a tradition than our faith, right? I was raised, I made my first Holy Communion. I was baptized. We got sent out the door to church. We never were brought to church. Nobody ever explained to me that Jesus died for me personally, for my sins. Nobody ever told me that. Nobody ever told me how much God loved me. I only heard God's going to get you, right? For all those sins, you're in a lot of trouble, right? And so the few times that I did go to Mass, I can remember being in Mass and thinking, wow, all of these people are holy. All of these people are good, and I am a filthy sinner. That's the way I felt, right? And, most of the times we didn't go to Mass. So on Sunday morning, how it worked for us was my parents would get up, we'd all get dressed. Whoever was old enough to walk the 1.5 miles to St. Gregory's got sent out the door to Mass. I never went to Mass with my parents. I never saw my dad in the Catholic Church. I never heard him pray. I never, it just wasn't part of who we were. And so there was a big hole, if you can imagine. I'm already missing this hole. And now I have, my dad was an alcoholic. And, he's from the previous generation. He worked hard, he drank hard, he provided for his family, and he thought that's what his job was, and he was doing his job. And so, needless to say, we didn't get along very well. I grew up in the 70s in Boston. Similar to Philly, it was during the forced integration of the school systems. And so from grade 1 to grade 7, I went to 7 different schools. Most of those schools I went to on a bus. And so every year I was the new kid in school, as well as many of the other kids were the new kids in school. And so how I sort of managed that was I looked for the other troublemakers, and I clicked right in with them, and we started trouble, right? And that's how I developed my reputation, if you will. And, I drank for the first time I was 8 years old. Older kids in the neighborhood thought it would be funny to watch the little kid drink. I drank. Nothing really happened to me. I didn't become addicted to alcohol in that moment, but I can tell you this. I did become addicted to the reactions that I was getting from these older guys. I did become addicted to their attention and their acceptance, and I made them laugh or whatever, right? I became connected to somebody, right? Because I had this terminal loneliness inside of me. I had 8 brothers and sisters. I could be in my house with my 8 brothers and sisters, my parents, and my dog, and feel completely isolated and alone. I can't explain to you why, but that was my first cross. And so I got, I drank, nothing happened. The next time I drank, I was It's probably 3 years later, I stole somebody's wallet. You can see the progression of my life there, right? I stole somebody's wallet from their locker at the Y. And it was $50 in that wallet, and for that $50, I gave it to the hippies who lived up the street from me, and for $50, I got a quart of Budweiser and a pack of Marlboros. And I thought that was a good deal. And that day, I did get drunk, and I got fallen down drunk. And I remember I went home, and I was in my basement, and we had like a play area in the basement, and I was watching Creature Double Feature, and the room started spinning, and I knew I better get out of the house quick. And I went up the stairs, and as I was going through the kitchen, my mother was sitting there on her perch smoking a cigarette on the phone with a 400-foot-long phone cord, right? The first cell phone. And I tripped, and I fell on the kitchen floor, and I threw up all over the kitchen floor. And all you could smell was alcohol. But just to be sure, my mother did make my sister smell it. To be sure. She wasn't fully convinced it was alcohol. And my mother said to me, "Who gave you alcohol?" And I couldn't even talk, but I just pointed up to the hippies up the street. I was like, "It was them. It was their fault." And my mother went up the street, and they were all still there hanging around, and she beat the head hippie up over the head with her shoe. And I got locked in my room, which when I look back on my life, it was like my first little sentence, right? I got locked in my room, and I remember how furious my dad was. But then I also remember the sort of, you know, in the old days, most of you guys are so young. Look at you all. Look at all these young people, right? In the old days, if you got caught smoking a cigarette, your parents might make you smoke a pack of cigarettes. So you get sick, and then you learn your lesson, you don't smoke again. And so I think my parents kind of thought that I was going to learn my lesson because I was so violently ill for days from this drinking episode. But it doesn't really work like that with alcoholism, right? And so after 3 or 4 days being locked in my room, my parents called me downstairs. "You're not old enough to drink. Don't ever do it again. Stay away from those people. Go out." And I was out of my house 3 minutes. And I was right back up to that hippie's house, ready to pay the price for snitching on him, as long as I could have some more, right? As long as I could have some more alcohol, as long as I could have some more cigarettes, as long as I could have some more attention, more importantly, right? As long as I could hang out with them. And for the next couple of years, they used me like their little mascot, you know? I was driving around in stolen cars at 12 years old, 11 years old. Some new neighbors moved in. They came with their moving truck. They put all their stuff in the house, and they left to return the moving truck, and these guys opened the window and threw me in the window so I could open the door, and they stole their belongings. Like, these are the kind of people I was hanging around with at 11 years old. 7th grade, I'm going to the Martin Luther King School in Roxbury, Massachusetts. I take a bus there every day, and it's the end of the year, and I go home, and dinner in my house was 5 o'clock. Every night at 5 o'clock, if you weren't there, you didn't get dinner. And so I'm there, and I'm eating, and, you know, I'm 12 years old, and my mind is down the corner, right? All my friends, we're all going out tonight. It's Friday night. It's the first Friday of the summer. We're going, and we're gonna do things that 12-year-old kids are not supposed to be doing. And so I'm eating my dinner as fast as I can. I get up. I'm heading for the back door, and my dad stops me. And he says, "Now, don't you forget, when those streetlights come on tonight, you better be in this house, or don't bother coming home." Now, it sounds rough to say that to a 12-year-old, but I had already been arrested. I had already been in trouble. I had already run away before. Like, I was already a difficult child. And so I went out that night, and I was down hanging behind the school with my friends, and we were, you know, drinking and smoking, and there was girls, and there was music, and I remember looking at the street light, and it started to flicker, you know? It was flickering, and I was like, I'm looking at the light, I'm looking at my Budweiser, I'm looking at my cigarette, I'm looking at my friends, and I just simply said, I'm not gonna make it. I'm not gonna make it. And in that moment, I chose that. I chose them. I chose everything over my family, and I stayed right there. And that was June 22nd, I don't even know what year it was, probably 1977, and I didn't go home until August. Not once did I go home. And I I stayed with friends. I lived outside. I got arrested a bunch of times. I ended up becoming a ward of the state. So the state was making the decisions about my life. And I would never live at home again for any real serious period of time, right? I would kind of come and go. But during that summer, I had stolen things from people. I had done some really shameful things. I was never more than like a mile away from my house. I was always right down the street on the corner with my friends. And I had 8 brothers and sisters, and they all hung on corners too, because that's what you do in Boston. You hang on a street corner or you hang in the park. And so I was doing all these shameful things, and they were bearing the brunt of it, right? It became, by the halfway through that summer, it wasn't a good thing if you were Jim's brother. My nickname is Jimbo, right? It wasn't a good thing if you were Jimbo's brother, because people would constantly come up to you. Are you Jimbo's brother? Oh my God, he stole this from somebody, he did this, he broke into this person's house. Like, what a scumbag, right? And so they were carrying that weight, right? And so I know that I contributed to making their life more difficult. And that added more shame. It got to the point where I would avoid seeing them, right? If I was walking down the street and I saw them and they were down there on their corner, I would go the other way, because I just didn't want to look in their eyes, and I didn't want to see the pain that I caused them. There was a time, so I'm living down the street, and it's summertime, and it sounds like, I was having some fun, right? I was drinking every day, hanging out, going to the quarries. I was doing things, but I was also getting my teeth knocked out, getting my head smashed open. It was a difficult time. And there was a time that I was really beat up and really banged up, and it was nighttime. And my mother, God bless her soul, used to work overnights at a bank building in Boston. She used to clean the offices at night. And I was sort of near the train station, and I could see her walking down the street, and I was hiding so that she didn't see me and I just wanted to cry out, "Mom, help me." But my life had progressed so far in that short period of time, and I had done so much damage in my home that I felt in my heart that she wouldn't help me. She didn't want to help me, or she did. I felt like, oh, they got 8 other kids at home to worry about. They're not worried about me. I didn't realize how much I was breaking my mother's heart, how much pain I had caused my dad, who was, a tough guy, right? And he grew up in a generation when he was 12 years old, he had a job. He was helping to provide for his family. And here I am, 12 years old, running the streets. And so I think it was why he was able to process, you can't be here, you got to go. Like, when he was 12, that would have been what they did to him. And so I'm a ward of the state. I'm in and out of juvenile detention. I'm in and out of group homes. I'm in and out of foster care. I'm going to school with other juvenile delinquents, and I'm learning how to commit more crimes and do more drugs. And so from 12 to 17, my life was a complete disaster. And when I was 17 years old, I got arrested for armed robbery. I robbed a guy, me and a couple of my friends. He had missed the last train at the train station that we hung out at, and we robbed him, and we beat this poor guy up. And the only thing he could remember from the incident was Jimbo, hearing Jimbo, right? I'm such a, creative criminal. And so then the cops, they knew exactly who to go to. And they came and they found me, and I went to court, and they sent me to state prison at 17 years old, because in Massachusetts at 17 you're tried as an adult. And I went to state prison, and I walked into this maximum security state prison, and here's all the guys I grew up with in juvenile detention. They're already there waiting for me, right? And so I'm doing 3 to 5 years. When I got there, they sort of explained to me how it works. If you behave yourself, you could be on parole in 2 years, right? But because of my need and my low self-esteem, whatever you want, I had no self-esteem. It wasn't low. It didn't exist, right? And I never had an original thought. I didn't have my own opinions on anything. I just said whatever you wanted to hear so that you would accept me, right? And so, I'm in prison. And there was a point when I was in prison that I was in and out of the hole, constantly getting locked up in prison because I kept getting in trouble in prison because I kept trying to have to impress other people, right? So that they would think I was something that they admired. And there was a time when I was walking through the cafeteria in that maximum security prison, and I knew a lot of guys, and prison is very segregated, right? It's it's segregated by race, it's segregated by color, by ethnicity, by religion in some cases, definitely by neighborhoods. And so each sort of neighborhood had their own little table, or each group had their own little table. And I can remember distinctly walking through that chow hall, that dining room, and at each table, I was a different person. I was who they wanted me to be. So an example of that would be if I walked up to a table and it was all Italian guys, I'd be talking like this, right? And if it was Irish guys, and if it was Spanish guys, I'd have just a hint of a Spanish accent. Like, that's how sad and pathetic my life was, right? That I didn't have my own identity. I just wanted you to like me. I just wanted you to, it was a sad existence. And so when I got there, they, like I said, in 2 years I could have been out on parole, but because of my need to impress other people, I ended up doing all 5 years on that sentence. And I did about 3.5 of that 5 years in the hole. And I remember they came to my cell, and it was 5 years. And they said, by our calculations, your time is all up. You're going home on Monday. This was Friday afternoon. Imagine if you can. I'm trying to talk them out of it. Oh, no. Your calculations are wrong. By my calculations, I got a couple more months, right? I don't want to leave because I don't have anywhere to go, and I don't understand. This is my life now. I understand this life. I know how to manage this life. I know how to manage my 6x9 cell. I know how to manage my relationships with these other dangerous people, right? And so they're like, no, Monday, you're going. And so I started frantically making some phone calls. And I called my older brother, Arthur, and I said, hey, I'm getting out, and I don't have anywhere to go. Could I come and stay with you until I get on my feet? And he said, oh, yeah, no problem. He said, listen, we just gave our 1 month notice. We're moving out of this apartment in 1 month. You can come and stay here for a month until you get a job, get on your feet, and you'll be all set. And so I said, okay, thank you very much. He picked me up at the prison. He was taking me to see my mom. On the way, we stopped at the local bar in my neighborhood because it was the first time I was ever old enough legally to drink alcohol. I had just done 5 years in prison, and this is the first time I'm old enough legally to drink. And so we went into my neighborhood bar that I hung in front of my whole life, and the owner, who was the bartender at that point, gave me a beer. He said, enjoy it. It's the last one you'll have here, because I had a whole history with this guy already. I drank that beer, and we went to see my mother, and my mother would tell me later that she knew within 5 minutes I was going back to prison, right? I was insane, is the best way I can put it. For me, getting out of prison after 5 years and spending most of that time in the hole, it was like getting dropped off in a foreign land, or on another planet even. I didn't understand what people were talking about. I didn't understand the language, and they weren't polite as the people in prison. People in prison are very polite. If they step on your toe, they say, excuse me, or there's going to be a real problem, right? And out in the world, they bump into you, they step on you, it's a different world. And so I immediately started to drink right away because I needed to feel different. I needed that anxiety and that fear to go away. And so I was out for 6 months. For that 6 months, I remember I stayed with my brother for the month. I remember him moving, and I said, yeah, I'm leaving tomorrow, and I just stayed. I just stayed in the apartment. And 2-3 days later, I came back, and all my clothes were back out on the front stoop in green trash bags, Irish luggage, right? And the landlord packed me up, moved me out, and was getting ready for the next tenant. And I was homeless again. I had nowhere to go again. And that wave of shame came over me like an ocean, right? And so I did my best to drink that shame away, right? I did my best to consume as many drugs as I could to feel a different way. At this time, in that 6-month period, I was introduced to cocaine for the first time. And very interesting drug. Very, very interesting drug. I remember the first time somebody offered it to me, it was the one and only time in my entire life I said, no, thank you. I said, no, I don't do that. And then the very next day, somebody offered it to me, and I said, absolutely. And so what I realized about what cocaine did for me was it allowed me to drink more. It allowed me to be awake more hours so I could drink more. And so for the next 6 months, I drank and did cocaine and any pill, any drug that I could get my hands on. If you said this will make you drowsy, don't operate heavy machinery, I'll take 10 of those, please. Right? Like that was my life, always in search of feeling some other way and escaping from reality. And so towards the end of my 6 months back on the streets, I started running around with a guy. His name was Billy, and Billy's gone now. And Billy was shooting 10 bags of heroin in the morning to get regular, right? So that he didn't feel physically sick. He needed that. And so in the morning, Billy woke up, and Billy was possessed. There was nothing was going to get in the way of Billy getting what Billy needed. And when I woke up in the morning, I was rumsick and afraid. So I needed Billy in my life, right? Billy was a very important part of my life because Billy would go and get us what we needed in the morning. And then after that, then I could do the things that I needed to do to get through the day, to get more alcohol and more drugs. And so as crazy as it sounds, from my seat on the Titanic, right? His seat on the Titanic looked a lot better, right? Not realizing we're both going to the bottom of the ocean. Our addictions are going to kill us. I'm just thinking, I need to be like that in the morning. And so I made a conscious decision. I want to shoot heroin because it looked like his life looked better than mine because I couldn't feel his life. I could only feel my life. And so I told him, I said, I want to try it. I want to try it. And to his credit, he was like, oh, no, you don't want to get into this, believe me. But I wouldn't let it go. And so my last day on the streets, he wouldn't give me any heroin, but he said, I'll let you try shooting cocaine, which is just completely insane. And I did that, and I was completely obsessed with the thought that I'm going to shoot heroin. And I went out that day, and I got smashed, and God intervened in my life that night. I got arrested for robbing a Boston police officer's home. And yeah, it doesn't sound like a rescue, does it? I was drunk, stumbling around South Boston, and I was just checking doors and car doors and first floor apartment doors, and I came across a door and it was open, and I went in. And nobody was home. And it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and I started collecting some of the belongings. I put them by the back door, and as I was getting ready to walk out, I thought, I think I'll look in the fridge. And I opened the fridge, and there was like a case of beer in there. I'm like, this is fantastic. And all of a sudden, I just picked up a beer, opened it, and sat down at this guy's kitchen table. And I started drinking the beer. And I might have dozed off. I know it's not that impressive. I know you were expecting like a bank robber of the town or something like that, but it's really not that pretty. I dozed off, and he came home. And needless to say, I woke up in the police station the next morning. And I woke up in the police station, and I had blood all over me, and I had no idea what was there. I didn't remember anything from the night before. And I was very afraid because I thought I probably killed somebody or hurt somebody really bad because I was a very violent alcoholic. Gratefully, I come to find out that blood was my blood, right? And yeah, thank God. And so I go to court, and they read the charges, and they're charging me with home invasion. And in Massachusetts, home invasion carries a life sentence. And so they're talking about giving me a life sentence. I'm 22 years old. And it was actually the police officer that spoke up on my behalf. He spoke to the district attorney. He said, "You want to give this kid life?" He's like, "Look at him. He's a mess. Why don't you get him some help?" Right? And he spoke up for me. God intervened through that police officer, not only on that day in the courtroom, but coming home that night and finding me in his home. And so I ended up getting a 6 to 9 year prison sentence. 6 to 9 years. I had already just done 5 years. And when they gave me 6 to 9 years, I started calculating, if I do 9 years, I'm going to be older than 30 when I get out, and that's prehistoric, right? I can't be here until I'm 30. I can't do that. And so I got to figure out another way. Hence the title of the book, The Big Hustle, right? That was me. I wasn't much, but I was all I thought about. And I was always thinking about any person I ever met. I was only thinking about what could I get out of them? What could I use them for? And so I'm back in prison, and I'm doing things to create the illusion that I'm trying to become rehabilitated. So I'm going to 12-step meetings. I'm going to therapy. I'm doing all this stuff, and I'm completely just running game. I can literally remember being in the meeting, and the outside person was speaking, and I remember thinking, wow, this is incredible. This is amazing. What an amazing program for these guys. But this is never going to work for me because I'm not worthy of this. That's where I was in my life. That's where I was in my journey. But because I ran the game well, because, I was a hustler, somebody took notice of me. It was the Catholic priest at MCI Concord up on Route 2 in Massachusetts. His name was Father Jim Freitas. He was a great man, and he's in heaven right now. And Father Freitas approached me, and he said, "You're Jim, right?" And I said, "Yeah, how you doing there, Father?" And he says, "I hear good things about you." And I said, "Really?" And I'm thinking in my head, "Oh, it's working, right? I'm a hustler, it's working." And he says to me, "Listen, we have a job opening in the chapel. We need a custodian. Would you be interested in that job?" And in that moment, I thought, "Ooh, absolutely." Priest smoked cigarettes. He had coffee in there. He had, privacy. There was a phone in there. Like, I'm going to manipulate this situation because I'm the big hustler, right? But what I didn't know was that he worked for God, and he was the real hustler, right? Father Freitas was a hustler. Father Freitas was smooth. Father Freitas was a great, great man. So I'm there. I'm cleaning. I'm doing my job. A couple of days into it, I say, "Hey, Father, listen, my brother apparently is in the singing group, and they got a new cassette tape for the younger kids. I'll explain to you what those are later. But they're selling cassette tapes at Tower Records, and I'll explain what Tower Records is to you later too. And I said to him, "Father, I've been a terrible big brother, and I would really love to be able to support my little brother in this endeavor. Could you bring me a cassette tape?" And he did it. And I was like, and I wasn't like, "Oh, I'm so grateful." I was thinking, "Oh, what am I going to get him to smuggle next?" That's the way my mind worked. And so he brought the cassette tape, and he was kind and generous always. And then he says to me after a couple of weeks, "Hey, listen, I need the chapel clean, spotless for Sunday Mass." He said, "Why don't you come on Saturday and you can clean after the Mass, the Vigil Mass?" And I said, "Okay, Father." I never saw the move. I never saw the hustle. I'm back. I'm in church. I'm in Mass, right? And I remember sort of that feeling that I had as a young man come back to me, right? Like, I'm not worthy of this. I don't belong here. I don't understand this. I didn't know the prayers. I didn't know the responses. I didn't know when to stand. I didn't know when to kneel. I didn't know anything. But I used to sit next to a guy named Michael, and I won't tell you his last name, but I mentioned the movie The Town earlier, and Michael was from Charlestown, and Michael was from multiple generations of bank robbers. A very, very dangerous man. But he was also a very Catholic man. Crazy, as it sounds, right? That was his career choice. That's the way he looked at it. That was his career, and he had his faith, and they were separate. And And he knew the prayers, and he knew when to stand, and he knew when to kneel, and he knew what to do. And so I just watched him and just did it. And so I'm back at Mass. I'm back at the foot of the cross, and I don't even see what's happening. I don't understand what's going on. And then Father Freitas comes to me so excited. Oh, Jim, I got some great news. You are not going to believe this. Mother Teresa is coming to this prison. And I said, oh my God, Father, that's incredible. Who's Mother Teresa? And he explained to me a little bit about who she was. And then, I remember I called home, collect from Jimbo. Oh, my mother used to hate that. Collect from Jimbo. And I said, hey, Mom, Mother Teresa is coming to this prison. And I remember hearing her repeat the words that I just said to her mother, who was in the kitchen, right? And I remember how excited her mother was. I need to explain to you her mother. So there's 9 kids in my family. At one point, her mother came to live with us. She took over that TV room we had where I was spinning around watching Creature Feature. She lived there, but to her, there was not 9 kids. There was 1 kid. My sister was the princess, and everybody else was dog food, right? She didn't like any of us. She didn't want anything to do with any of us. But my sister would be down there eating Entenmann's donuts, sitting on a recliner, watching TV, living it up, and we got nothing. And so, but for the first time, I said or did something that excited this woman, Leone McPeck. She was excited. I could hear the excitement in her voice. What do you mean, Mother Teresa? He's got to get me a rosary. He's got to do something with me. And I'm starting to understand that this is really important because nothing excited this woman. Nothing. And so I start to do a little research. I start to get a sense that somebody really important is coming to the prison. Not somebody really holy, somebody really important, because I didn't know what holiness was or what it meant or how it would refer to another person. And so the day came, and I was walking through the quad in the prison, and I looked, and the gate for the outside opened, and a bunch of people came walking through the door, and I could see that they weren't wearing prison clothes. That's all I could really see. And then as they got closer, I could see the men were wearing suits, and then I started to recognize some of the men. It was the governor. It was the warden. It was the commissioner of the Department of Corrections. It was all these important people. And at a certain point, they just kind of parted, and there she was. There was Mother Teresa with a couple of the sisters from her order, and they were walking towards us. And as they got closer, I started to recognize her, and I recognized some very specific things about her. I remember looking at her feet, looking at her sandals, and thinking, they look like they're 200 years old. And I remember looking up at her sweater, and it had holes, moth holes in it. And it looked like it was like 200 years old. And then I looked, and she had pockets here, and in the pockets was money. Cash was sticking out of her pockets. So I got to confess, I did spend a little more time looking at her pockets than I did her feet or the rest of her sweater. But I was perplexed because there's no money in prison. There is no cash in prison, right? And so I was confused by it, and I would come to understand that a lot of people were very kind to Mother Teresa. A lot of people were trying to buy a ticket to heaven through Mother Teresa. They would just give her money. But I think people knew that she would do what was right with the money, so they would just give her money. And so, that we had that encounter. I didn't talk to her. She didn't talk to me. We didn't really make eye contact. They walked by. I went to the chapel, and Father Freitas, again, all excited. Oh, Jim, you don't even understand. He said, you're going to be part of the procession because you work in the chapel. And I'm like, wow, Father, that's great. What's a procession? I don't know what that is, right? He says, you're going to walk in with the cardinal. You're going to walk in with Mother Teresa and all these special people. And I was like, oh, that's great. And, it's a wonderful and amazing thing in your life if you're blessed with the gift of a miracle. The miracle that I had is that, and that I have in my heart today is I can go back to that moment and know that that's the moment that my life changed. The direction of my life changed. My desire to know Jesus happened in that moment on that day. And so we process in, and cardinals are very important people, right? They're hierarchy, and so the cardinal had a lot going on. He had a big hat, he had staff, like all this stuff that I didn't understand. And in we come, and he comes up on a stage just like this. This is the altar at MCI Concord. And he comes up the stairs, and he's got a big fancy chair for him. He didn't put it there. I don't mean it to sound negative. There's a chair there for him, and next to him there's a chair for Mother Teresa. He comes up the stairs, he stands over by his chair, he's beckoning Mother Teresa, and she says, no. And she's praying with her hands like this, and she's this big, and she humbly refuses to come on the altar. Instead, she kneels down on the floor in the middle of all the inmates with her sisters. And I was very confused, right? I was very confused. I'm like, this is her moment to shine. She's a big shot. Like, take your spot in the light, right? But no. And there was a moment while she was kneeling there and I was on the other aisle that I was on my knees, and I just kind of looked over, and I felt as though I was looking at the face of God. I didn't have an understanding of what was going on, but something was happening to me. And so it came time for Mother Teresa to go up and make her remarks. And she got up, and the words that she said changed my life. She said that God loved me, that I was a child of God, and that Jesus Christ died for me. And I want to tell you, brothers, that there was a moment, it was about this many people in this gymnasium. For just an instant, it felt like it was nobody there. It was just her talking to me, telling me that Jesus died for me. And it overwhelmed me. It overwhelmed me. I can't tell you about what happened the rest of the day. I don't know what happened the rest of the day. It was a little bit of foggy for me. I was very confused. I was very emotional. I went back to my cell, and I went to sleep, and the next day, all the cells open at the same time, just like in the movies, right? And the cell opens, and I run out of my cell, and I run to the chapel. And I'm running, and I see Father Freitas, and I run to Father Freitas, and I say, Father, I need to know more about that God. I need to know about this Jesus that she's talking about. What is going on? I can't explain to you what's happening with me. And I was very emotional, and Father Freitas, the big hustler that he was, I think he might even chuckled a little bit, right? Like, gotcha, right? I gotcha, right? I'm going to get the toaster, right? I gotcha. And I want to tell you that the miracle happened from that point forward. And the miracle that happened was that Father Freitas and I knew each other pretty well, right? And he started to catechize me. He started to prepare me to make my confirmation. I never made my confirmation. Now I'm 23 years old, 24 years old. I'm in state prison, and I'm preparing to make my confirmation. And after a few months, the order came down. I was being transferred to another prison. And Father Freitas called me to the chapel, and he picked up the phone, and he called the priest in the next prison that I was going to. And he said, Father, I got a special delivery FedEx package coming to you. His name is Jim Wahlberg. This is where we are in the process. Please handle with care. Okay? And that's what I needed. I needed to be handled with care. If I went and he handed me a book, that wouldn't work for me. I could barely read. If he got too deep and it was too educationally given to me, no, it was just like he was talking to a 12-year-old. Right? He was just teaching me about the faith. He passed me off to the next priest, and that priest picked up where he left off. And then not long after that, I got transferred again to a minimum security prison. And it's important for me to say that I had this encounter with Jesus, and I was building this relationship with Jesus, and things in my life were getting better, right? things in my life were getting better. I needed evidence. I'm sorry, my faith was weak. I needed evidence. And the evidence was that I was doing this, and I was now in a minimum security prison, right? I'd never been to a minimum security prison. I always went the other way to maximum security prison. And so I was passed off to the next priest. Not long after, he said, "You're ready. And we are going to have a confirmation here in the prison with you." And I remember I called my mother. Now, I left out just a little piece of the first time I was in prison. I was in it's 23 hours a day lockup. You have a barred door and a solid door with a little window in front of you. And we're treated like animals. And my mother came to visit me. It was the one and only time she ever visited me in prison. And I come out to the visiting room. I look like Charles Manson. I got ankle chains, waist chains, jumpsuit. My front teeth are missing. Like, I'm just an awful mess. And I come out to the visiting room, and she doesn't recognize me as her own child. She just starts crying. She doesn't know what's going on. She can't understand anything of what I'm saying to her. I'm an animal at this point. And so when I called her to say that I'm going to make my confirmation and I would really like you to come, she said, I don't know about that. Let me think about that. Call me back tomorrow. I got to think about it, right? And she really had to think about it, and I'm sure she had to pray on it too. And the next day I called her back, and she reluctantly agreed to come to my confirmation. And brothers, that day, the healing that happened between my mother and I on that day would last and grow all the way to her last days on this earth. My mother would say to me every once in a while, she would say, "Jimmy, oh, Jimmy, do you remember that day? Do you remember the day I knew you were different? Do you remember the day I knew that God touched you? Do you remember that?" And she would, then we're talking 30, 40 years now of time as 30 years. So, and if anybody's ever been to a Wahlburgers or watched the show Wahlburgers, there's this little joke, right? There's 9 of us. Everyone thinks they're mom's favorite, right? So they sell shirts. They say mom's favorite. And towards the end of my mom's life, she had full-on dementia. In a moment of clarity, she called me. And she said, "Jimmy, I want you to know something. You are my favorite." Right? And now I know this same speech has been given to all 9 of us. Don't get excited. But for the first time, she started to explain to me why I was her favorite, right? And she told me, she said, "You're my favorite." And she started to talk about all the things that I had to overcome, all the hurdles in my life, all the difficulties that I had. And now I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a brother again. I'm trusted in my family. I'm respected in my family. I'm now the resident expert on addiction in my family. But in that moment of clarity, she explained to me why I was her favorite. And brothers, I want to tell you that as my mother got progressively worse and her health declined, I was blessed to be able to get in my car in Florida and drive to Boston and care for her, right? And I was able to be there when she took her last breath. And I was able to be myself and my family. We brought Jesus into the conversation of what was going on, and we prayed rosaries and invited my family who are not necessarily participating in the faith to pray rosaries with us. And every day we would leave the house and they were like, "Where are these guys going?" Well, they're going to daily mass, right? You see, God is, There are no words, right? Only God can take the guy that I just told you about, right? And take all that ugliness and all that sin and all the difficulties I lived in my life, and take all of that and turn them into assets, right? So that, I can be the guy that if somebody presents themselves as having difficulties with a drink or a drug, that I might know the right words to say to them, right? I might have some information for them. I might be able to point them in the right direction. Or if my nephews needed an example of what it is to really be a man because their dad wasn't there for them, right? I get to do that. Right? Because of God's mercy and God's grace that he's poured out over me. Anybody have a time? How much time I got left? Minutes? Oh, no, we're going till 10 tonight. So, brothers, I have this encounter with Jesus. I have this amazing, revolutionary conversion. I complete my sentence. I go to the parole board, and I go in, and I give them the old easy does it, keep it simple, Jesus loves you, and they laugh at me, right? And they have my folder, and it's this big, and they're like, listen, whatever, right? We know who you are. You haven't gotten any trouble since you've been here. We're going to let you go, and we'll see you when you get back, right? It sounds like a rotten thing to say, doesn't it? But honestly, I figured I'd be back. I mean, I didn't know anything else. I didn't know how to live outside. I didn't. And there was also a letter there. And they opened up the letter, and it was a letter from my mother. Now, I need to explain to you who my mother is. And when it comes to the law and lying for her children, it's something that she was never willing to do, okay? My brother Bob got arrested. Him and all his friends, they're up at Dorchester Court. They're all lined up in front of the judge. And behind them, each one of them, their mother. And the judges are talking to the mothers. Tell me about your son. Oh, Father, he's a wonderful boy. He helps old ladies cross the street. He has a job. He does his chores. He goes to school every day. Right down the line. They get to my mother. Tell me about your son. He needs to be locked up. He's dangerous. He doesn't come home at night. I haven't seen him in 2 weeks. He's drinking alcohol. He's a mess. That's who my mother was, okay? Because that's what you needed, was the truth, right? You needed to be locked up. You needed to be intervened upon. And so she wrote this letter, and she said, basically, before you stands a man of God. It's okay. You can let him go now. He won't be back. And that was her letter. And, and they dismissed it. I was very impressed. My mother has never spoken up on my behalf in any situation. It was always my fault. And so I got out of prison. And I was full of the Holy Spirit, and I was sober, and I was clean, and I was living this great life. And this, you might have heard of this thing that happened in the church in Boston, this scandal of epic proportions, right? And so I'm going to these meetings, and I'm hearing people telling me that they can create their own conception of God, and I'm not criticizing that whatever works for you. I know that I need Jesus, right? But now this thing is happening, and now I'm weak, and I can be plucked, right? And so I start believing what they're saying because I can't participate in this anymore. It hurt me too much. It hurt me too deeply. And I was very angry, and I was ashamed because I was a Catholic, and I was wearing that on my sleeve, and I was ashamed. And I couldn't process that it wasn't the Catholic Church, it was these men, these flawed men, and that, the devil found his way. And so I drifted away from my faith. And see, the thing about drifting away for me of my faith is prior to having this encounter with Jesus, I had an excuse. I didn't know Jesus. I didn't know about the sacraments. I didn't know about any of those things. But now I knew. And I was consciously walking away from Jesus after he redeemed me and healed me, and it was a heavy load. It was a heavy load to be carrying. Believe me when I tell you, it was a heavy load to be carrying around, because my thought process when it comes to Jesus is infantile. I don't understand. There's no such thing as Jesus turning his back on me because he's unhappy with me. He loves me unconditionally, right? But I don't understand that. I think in human terms, I have offended Jesus Christ, so now he's got a resentment against me, and he don't want to talk to me the way I treat other human beings. I'm thinking that he's that small, right? He's that small. And so I drift away. Somehow I continue to stay sober. Somehow I continue to progress in what the world thinks is success, right? I buy a home, I'm married, I have 3 beautiful children who have never seen me drink. I got a couple of fancy things, right? And I'm back to the same guy that was walking through the prison, I had no opinion again. I had no original thought again. I was only interested in what you thought of me. So I would spend my time trying to impress you. Get a nice watch, I get a fancy gold chain, I get a nice car. I just get stuff to make you think, wow, he's doing great. Look at him. Look at him go. And, that only works for so long. That only works for so long. So at a certain point, my wife said to me, we're moving to Florida. You can come with us if you want, right? And I was like, huh? And that was it. We moved to Florida. Right? Because I wasn't going to let my children grow up without a dad, even though I wasn't very much of a dad. I was not a great example of what it is to be a dad again. I was empty again. I had this big hole in me again. I was unhappy. I was unsatisfied. I was unfulfilled again. We moved to Florida. A couple of years go by. I think I got everybody fooled. Right? All my neighbors, oh, he's a great guy. He helps us put our hurricane shutters up. Like my kids are like, oh, my dad's so funny. Meanwhile, I'm spending most of my time in my room alone, away from my family. I'm not, like my wife is like, we got to bring the kids to church. I'm like, yeah, I'm not going there. I'm good. I got my own relationship with the God of my own understanding. Right? That's what I'm left with. Nothing. Because if I'm left to create my own conception of God, he's going to be a pool hustler. He's gonna co-sign all my bad behaviors. I don't need the sacraments. And so my wife goes on a Catholic woman's retreat called Juan 23, John 23, in Spanish only. My wife is from the beautiful country of the Dominican Republic. She goes on this retreat and she comes back and she's had a conversion of epic proportions. But I know most of the guys in here are married, so if your wife goes and does something and gets moved or something happens to her or she falls in love with some idea, it ain't going to be long before you are going to fall in love with that idea too, or there's going to be a problem. But my wife didn't do that. She came home and she was more loving. She was more kind. She was more patient. She was more tolerant. And the big one, she was more forgiving. Right? Because my wife was famous for bringing stuff up that happened 10 years ago. Like at a dinner on Valentine's Day, she might mention 10 years ago I did some terrible thing, right? And she was filled with the Holy Spirit. She was touched by God, right? And he had healed her of her anger and her unhappiness and her resentment. And I was happy for her, and I was happy for me because I wasn't getting yelled at anymore, right? And it was great. And it wasn't long before she started to say or suggest or nudge, hey, there's a men's retreat coming up soon, a couple of weeks. You should go. Yeah, no, I'm good with that. I'm good. I don't need that. Her best friend also went to the retreat with her, and so they were working in tandem against the 2 husbands. But the 2 husbands got together as well, and we made a covenant not to be broken, right? You don't go, I don't go. If you don't break the line, I don't break the line. We don't cross the picket line. We're not going. Okay. But he doesn't understand my wife. He doesn't understand that my wife has a secret weapon. At the time was my 12-year-old daughter. Little soldier for Christ, right? My daughter comes to me and she says, Daddy, I want you to go on this retreat. I want you to be happy. I want you to know Jesus. And in that moment, she just ripped the mask off my face, right? And she was telling me, you are not happy and you don't know Jesus, right? And, you know, I say yes because I can't say no. She's my little angel. She's 12 years old. She's the apple of my eye. I can't say no. And so I say yes. And then I say to myself, why did you just say that, right? It's not good. But, you know, I'm using it. I got a few weeks, so I got some grace period, right? I've already said yes, so now I'm sitting pretty. Everybody's happy with Daddy because he's going. I haven't actually gone yet, right? And then the time comes, and the whole time I'm thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And then the best I could come up with was, you did 10 years in prison. You can do 3 days with these idiots, right? You know what to do. You know how to keep people at a distance. You know what to do. You have the tools, right? And so I did just that. And I want to tell you that I walked into that retreat. It was an Emmaus retreat. I walked into that retreat. I might even have had this same blue sweatshirt on. It was like 15, 16 years ago. But I walked into the retreat like this. And I had my prison face was on, my shield was on, right? And it was, and I literally, it was like, I looked like the Heisman Trophy. You know, I was like, just back up. You know, they were like, hey, brother, how you doing, brother? Let me take your bag, brother. Welcome, man. You know, Jesus loves you, brother. And I'm like, oh, my God, right? And the gift of my life in all my prior experience and my prior encounter with Jesus and the thousands of meetings I went to in my life, you know, I could sit through people standing up and telling me about the difficulties of their lives and how their life got better. I could sit through that, right? And, you know, there was almost like the angel and the devil thing going on my shoulders. I remember hearing in my own voice, we don't belong here. This is really weird, right? And then over here, I was thinking, just keep an open mind. What are they going to do? They're not going to kill you, right? And then here I was thinking, I can't leave because how do I explain to my 12-year-old daughter that I couldn't get through a weekend talking about Jesus, right? Like I would let her down, and I couldn't do that. And so, you know, God does what God does, right? And little by slow, the ice started to melt. And little by slow, my spirit started to awaken. And I started to realize, because I started to hear other men sharing their testimonies, I started to realize, no, wait a minute. Jesus didn't turn his back on me. I turned my back on him. He's right there. He's right there. And they were telling me he's right there, man. Just take a look in his direction. Just peek. And that's all I did. I just peeked, and he got his arms around me again, right? And I felt the warmth. And at this retreat, you know, there's a process, and I won't really share the process with you because it'd be unfair. Hopefully you all will go on that retreat. But most Catholic retreats include the sacrament of confession. And so it's that time. And I'm crying. I can't make words. I'm boogie crying, right? And they march me into this room, and the priest is there, and I just start blurting, and the priest is looking at his watch, and he's like, yeah, there's like 35 guys out there. This thing is only going until Sunday, right? But I was completely immersed in God's mercy. I was completely I felt his presence again for the first time in my life. You know, the cardinal talked about his dad and our Father, right? And see, here's the thing. The only thing that heals me of that loneliness, right, is knowing that I'm never alone. And I'm never alone because God is with me, right? And that Jesus loves me. I don't have to ever be alone again, right? And I feel that again now for the first time in many years. And what happened and the importance of all my prior experience was what I learned the first time was I had this almost white light Jesus experience, and then I thought I was going to coast on that it didn't require any effort on my part, that I didn't have to do any work. I was just going to feel Jesus all the time, and everything was going to be great, right? And it doesn't work like that for me. Any relationship worth having takes effort. I'm married to my wife almost 29 years. A lot of heavy lifting, right? A lot of work, right? A lot of pain, a lot of sadness, a lot of arguing, a lot of forgiveness, right? And a lot of prayers, right? But if I want that relationship to work, I can't just not listen to her and don't hear her and just turn a deaf ear to her and just do me, right? I have to put effort into that. And if I want to have a relationship with Jesus, yes, he will love me, whether I put the effort in or not. But if I want to feel his presence in my life, right, I got to put the effort in. And so that was the difference, was that I knew that now. I knew that if I wanted this relationship, I had to put it in effort. And so that was 15 years ago. You know, sometimes people talk about regrets, right? And I've shared a little bit, and just really a very little bit about my life, you know, BC, right, before Christ, right? And it wasn't pretty. And then I shared a little bit about my life AC after Christ and walking away from Christ. I can't even put into words how good he has been to me, you know? And I can't, I come to these events and I get asked to do this once in a while, and I try to say yes. And I come here and then I got to follow like one of the greatest speakers I think I've ever heard, right? And you're no slouch either, buddy. I'm like, why is he emceeing? Why isn't he the speaker? Why? Let me MC and let him speak, right? I guess I'm going to wrap this up. And how I want to wrap this up is I want to say this. And I'm very driven to distraction, but I got to take a picture of something real quick, and I'll tell you what it is. So I believe in signs. It's just a weird thing, right? My son was born 30 years ago and a couple of days ago, and his hospital room was 7:45. And when my son was going through his difficulties, we would always notice the time. For some reason, we would only notice it at 7:45, and so we would pray for him at 7:45. And I just looked down here, and it says 7:45 right there on your book, not my book, right? So just thought I'd mention that. I'm a little distracted. But anyways, I want to wrap this up by saying this, brothers. Nothing is too big for God, right? Nothing is too big for God. I went on a men's retreat last week in California, in a St. Michael's Abbey in Orange County, and I went there, you know, thinking, retreats. I like retreats now. You don't have to drag me to them. The guy asked me to go. I didn't ask for an explanation. I didn't ask what's going on. I just said yes, because I know that there's benefit for me there. It's time for me to spend with Jesus there. And I got there, and I walked in, and they were like, yeah. And they were talking amongst themselves. I'm like, what's going on? They're like, oh, we're going to fast. And I'm like, oh, that's great. We're just going to have some bread? And he's like, no. We're just going to drink water for the next couple of days. And I'm like, what? And they're like, yeah, water. We're going to do it for 3 days. We're just going to do water. And I'm like, good thing that you didn't tell me that on the phone, right? But I was able to do that with these men. And these are great men, right? And there was we're in this abbey, and these priests are doing talks and teachings for us. And I had a very sort of deep, profound moment. See, I kind of compartmentalized my life. And so I kind of washed away my own sins, if that's the craziest thing anyone's going to say to you today, prior to my encounter with Christ. I said, oh, I'm just going to forget about all that stuff, because now I know Jesus, and now I'm going to do good from now on, right? And so I had this weight on me. Right, of these things that I did as a young man. And this priest got up, and his father, John Henry, was speaking, and God gave me grace. And he said, my son, we're leaving that bag of rocks here today. We're leaving that bag of rocks here today. You are my son. You are going to be free of this, right? And you are going to be redeemed like I promised you. Like I promised you. You will be forgiven. There's nothing is too big for God, brothers. Nothing is too big for God. I want to thank you. I want to say that I'm always humbled when I'm asked to do this, because, it's like I don't necessarily feel like I have much to offer. But thank you, and God bless you, and we'll see you again at Man Up.